Howdy. Howdy. Hey, here we go. Nah, y'all fell for it. All right, guys, my name is Davis Varghese. I am the president of St. Joseph Clubs, and it is my honor and privilege to welcome you guys to Logos Rising Meeting 2. Can I get a quick round of applause for that? Awesome. So before we start, just a quick little introduction about me. I don't know about you guys, but I got my first phone in 7th grade. And it might be a little early for some people. My older sister got it in high school. My younger sister got it in like 5th grade. I got my first phone in 7th grade. My first phone wasn't an Android, or it wasn't an iPhone, it wasn't a Samsung. It was something called an Alcatel. I don't know if you guys know what that is, like a Middle Eastern company. And instead of buying a new phone line, my dad took the SIM card from my home phone and put it into my little Alcatel. I didn't even know that was possible. I thought landlines had like a wire. I didn't know they had SIM cards. But I have that same number to this day. And to this day, I keep getting spam calls. Every single day, I'm getting calls from telemarketers, from car salesmen, people trying to buy the house, all these things. It's really annoying because I have an iPhone now, and so I can't just like reject the call. I have to like double tap on the power button. Very, very annoying. But the one benefit of at least getting these spam calls on the phone is it says scam likely, right? Very good for me. The unfortunate thing is that works in the phone, but in our minds, we don't have a scam likely notification. In our days, in today's day and age, with all this technology, all these different distractions, we are overwhelmed with a bunch of different thoughts from the outside and also from the inside. And because of that, it becomes incredibly difficult to discern the voice of God from the voice of the evil one. How do we differentiate the divine from the distractions? And what are the ways for us in this state of warfare to seek out wisdom? To answer this question and to help us kind of curate and develop that scam-likely kind of voice in our heads to discern, is this God or is it someone else? I have my buddy, Joel Vetticadan, to give us a presentation on the discernment of spirits. Can I get a round of applause?
Okay, good evening. How's everybody? So thank you again. Thank you, Davis, for the introduction. Thank you for everybody for coming. So the Discernment of Spirits by St. Ignatius of Loyola. Before we get started, I was wondering if we could I'm going to put this prayer up. This is a prayer from St. Ignatius, and if we can actually start together with this, this will actually help us to be open to listen to the spirits and all that we have. So we can all say this together. Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and my entire will. All I have and call my own. You have given all to me, and to you, Lord, I return it. Everything is yours. Do with it what you will. Give me only your love and your grace. That is enough for me. Amen. So I'm really excited. I'm really excited to share. In fact, as I was making this presentation, I had multiple titles that I wanted to do for this. So I had here the Discernment of Spirits. I had 14 Rules of Ignatian Discernment, How to Make a Decision 101, How to Know What God Really Wants for Your Life. This was a fan favorite that Davis suggested, Defense Against the Dark Arts, which I thought that was actually really beautiful. But for the time being, we'll stick to the Discernment of Spirits. And so where does this talk kind of come about? Like, what is this and what do we have here? And so here's this book. It's called The Discernment of Spirits, an Ignatian Guide for Everyday Living. And this is by Father Timothy Gallagher. So we all know of St. Ignatius of Loyola, and he developed 14 rules in the spiritual exercises. These rules are sort of a toolbox in how to, like Davis said, to discern the spirit, the voice of God, the voice of the evil one, and differentiate that from what is happening in our own self. And I remember last year, I encountered this book last year. I was under spiritual direction, and I started it for the first time. And this was actually a book that my spiritual director suggested. He's a very Ignatian guy, and he suggested to just go through this book. And the emphasis was, it's an Ignatian guide for everyday living. And so as we go through all these 14 rules, I handed you guys 2 pieces of paper. One of them is more of the formal settings of the 14 rules. I'll have it also on the slides. And then also on the other paper is actually a more simplified version of it for us to really understand and have it more digestible. So I will say the last thing too with this book, I remember last year when I did read this, I wasn't really good at committing to reading a book, but this was definitely one of them. And when I finished through this book, this changed my life. I really never seen a book that was able to systematically really put to words what are the things that I'm feeling, all the spiritual consolation that I felt, or all the desolation in my life. And after I read this book, it really gave you, like I said, I'm going to say the word toolbox so much more because it gives you the practical instances. What we have here, these rules were written in the late 14th, 15th century, and you'll see as we go throughout it that it's still so relevant to today. And that is why we had those two pieces of paper to really show you the rules in its original language and also the simplified version of it. So what was ever shared in the late 14th century being able to apply to now. So when we say the discernment of spirits, so let's start off with and break down that title before we get going. Discernment. That comes from the Latin root word discernere. So that kind of means to sift or to separate. To know what is of one thing versus what is the other. And what in this book that St. Ignatius brings us is he kind of highlights over two forms of discernment. The first one is, I love the Lord with all my heart, and I want to know in the instances what is the will of God. Is it this job or this job? Which one will help me proclaim the kingdom of God? I want to do the Lord's will, but I don't know which one. And that is kind of what the key of discernment is. And then the second is kind of really highlighted in this book. And this book talks about how there are kind of three things that are going on in our lives. I'm going to be saying the word of spirits. And so spirits, as we have in the paper, it's the affective stirrings of our heart. Is that joy? Is that love? Is that peace? Or is it sadness, fear, and anxiety? So all these things, these are the things that are the interior movements of our hearts. And so what St. Ignatius is trying to provide us is how to discern what is of God and what isn't. And as we have that, that second form of discernment is to really help you understand, okay, this is the voice of the Lord speaking to me. This is the voice of the tempter that's speaking to me. And then this is also my own voice that is also talking. And so as I talk through the 14 rules, I'm going to be mentioning two things. I'm going to be mentioning the good spirit, that is that of the Holy Spirit, the uplifting of our own hearts. And then we have the evil spirit, the spirit that works in us to tempt us, to fall into sin, to keep us away from the voice of the Lord. And so these are the kind of three things that really happen in our everyday life. There are spirits that are working in our life. Please bear with my stick figures. This is the best that we're going to do to depict what I have going on. But these are the three things that are happening in our lives. And this is a toolbox in a sense to discern what is of good, what is of bad. And before we get started, this is actually the prologue of the book, and this actually comes down to very simple 3 steps. Each of the rules that you have in this book, there's 14 chapters in this book. Each chapter is dedicated to one rule. It provides examples, and it provides this set formula in a sense. And when we say this, we're going to see this in the application of all the 14 rules that we go through. But I wanted to explain it now so we can really understand. So when we talk about the 3 steps as we're discerning, we start off with be aware. It's very simple, being aware of, okay, there are spirits working at me. There's my own voice. There's the good spirit that's trying to uplift me, provide inspiration, wanting me to pray more, get closer to God. Or I should also be aware of, okay, there's also the bad spirit trying to lead me towards one way or the other. So being aware of the stirrings of your heart, that your heart, there's some interior movement. Understanding is what I said earlier about knowing, okay, this is good and this is bad. This is of the good spirit, this is what God is intending for me, and then this is the tempter trying to play tricks on me. And then finally, take action, the most important one. If it's of the good spirit, if the good spirit is giving me a good inspiration, I should pray more. I should accept that good spirit, that inspiration, and go with that. But if it's a bad spirit, don't pray, don't do that. You are really stuck in a debt. You're not worthy enough. Then that's where we take action to reject the bad spirit. So these are the 3 things that we're going to always keep bringing up. Are we understanding that there's interior movements in our heart? Are we understanding which one is of God and which one isn't? And then are we taking action? Are we accepting or are we rejecting? So now that we have all our bags packed, We are going to go through each of the 14. It may feel like a lot, and that's why the paper really will help you to take it and to be able to digest it. But as we go through the whole 14, I'm going to share, and we'll provide examples. I'll provide the simplified language that we have. And so, without further ado, we're going to actually go over rules 1 and 2. So 1 and 2 is actually a pair. And so this is how St. Ignatius opens up this discernment of spirits. So this is the formal text that's in the book. This was written in Spanish originally, and then Father Timothy, along with many others, were able to translate this into a digestible English. But let's read the whole thing. So the first rule is, in persons who are going from mortal sin to mortal sin, the enemy is ordinarily accustomed to propose apparent pleasures to them, leading them to imagine sensual delights and pleasures in order to hold them more and make them grow in their vices and sin. In these persons, the good spirit uses a contrary method, stinging and biting their conscience through the rational power of moral judgment. So, that's a lot of words. That is a lot of words. So we're going to introduce a guy. His name is Ephraim. This is just a name that I picked. I like this name. Let's just say, for example, Ephraim is, let's say, not really following up in his faith life, maybe not going to Sunday Mass. Maybe he's in college and he's partying it up. He's surrounded by sin, not really feeling the presence of God, and also not having that lack of care for it. And so, in what we say, and what the first rule is trying to say, is that in a person that is going from mortal sin to mortal sin, that's the highlight of what this is. And it talks about, in this rule, what the evil spirit is doing in the first half, and then also what the good spirit is doing in the bottom. So, as it's saying, when we're going from mortal sin to mortal sin, what the evil spirit is actually going to do in your life is to provide you sensual delights, help you to stay in that sin. Don't look and don't feel the voice of God, don't feel the presence, and stay in that. You want to fall into that. You want to party, you want to go crazy and not really go to church, all these very simple things. But then at the end, it talks about what is the role of the good spirit. And the good spirit is one that bites you, that stings you, our conscience. So if we were, if this person, Ephraim, is partying it up, maybe the role in this for the good and evil spirit is that these are the kind of biting that the good spirit would probably want to say to that person. Where is God? Do you feel fulfilled in this? Is this really like the life that you want? Do you want this? And that here is the very simplified, this is on the simplified language. So essentially, it's when a person is living from serious sin to serious sin, the bad spirit is going to provide you and give you more ammo to stay in that, to stay in sin, to not go further than that. While the good spirit, on the other half, will try to sting and bite at you. And God's loving action, which I love to say, that calling the person back. And so, with that, I'm going to go with the second rule. And the second rule is very beautiful because it's the exact opposite. In the person who is going on intensely purifying their sins and rising from good to better in the service of God our Lord, the method is contrary to that of the first rule. So what we have here is that what we said the good spirit was like biting at you, that's actually flipped. Now the role of the good and evil spirit gets reversed. So now you see, if this is for someone that's not going from mortal sin to mortal sin, but is genuinely desiring to strive for the Lord's will, trying to purify our own hearts and wanting to take away sin from our lives. So what the role of the good spirit is going to do is try to help you in that, help you feel the uplift movement of your heart to move you towards God. And what the evil spirit is doing, which is the exact counter opposite of what's happening in the first rule, is that the evil spirit is going to try to bite you and try to tempt you and try to take away from you. And these are the sort of things that we live every single day in our lives. And so this is the life of prayer. And so when it comes to this, as St. Ignatius is going through this, he talks about in the second rule, these are the kind of things that the evil spirit is going to try to do. If you have like a consistent prayer life, if you've been working really hard to, okay, I'm going to go pray for about 30 minutes every day, the evil spirit is going to try to be like, you can't really keep this on forever. You're not going to be able to do this. It's going to try to deflate the situation so that you could go back to that first rule. So it's very important that we talk about these first two because it's someone that is avoiding sin and is loving God, making the conscious effort to pursue God. What's very, very important is that the rest of the rules do not apply to you if you're not under this rule 2. And so it's very important to understand that if you are in rule 1, if you find yourself in that, if you're going from mortal sin to mortal sin, actually the rest of the rules don't really apply to you until we fall into that rule 2. Lord, I want to follow you. Lord, I want to renounce this sin. And so there is, as we can see, the role of the evil and the good spirit as it's going through this. And so the first 2 rules are actually a question that you're supposed to ask yourself. Where am I really at? Am I someone that is going from mortal sin to mortal sin? Or am I actively trying to fall away from sin and follow the Lord? See, rule 2 is the movement towards God, and rule 1 is simply movement towards away. So that's why I have this arrow. It's asking yourself, what is the fundamental direction of your life? Are you moving towards God or are you not? Rule 3 to 4, as we're going into it, is going to talk about consolation and desolation, can we raise our hands how many have ever felt that in that sense, whatever version of that, spiritual consolation, spiritual desolation. So what these 2 rules are is what St. Ignatius is kind of putting a description or what it really feels like. So rule 3, we'll actually go to this simplified one. When your heart finds joy in God, a sense of God's closeness and love, you're experiencing spiritual consolation, and you're opening your heart to the gift of God. And so I have this consolation, it's great, it's awesome. And maybe like a clear example of this, when I first experienced what consolation was, it's whenever I left like a middle school or high school retreat, and I'm like on fire, like I love the Lord so much, I want to do His will, I want to pursue and I want to read scripture, I want to pursue prayer. That is moments of consolation. Consolation is the upliftedness of your heart towards God. And so we have in Rule 4 the exact opposite. So how we see how Rule 1 and Rule 2 kind of go opposite from each other, that's the same thing that's happening here with Rule 4. Rule 4, this is of spiritual desolation. I call desolation all the contrary of the 3rd rule, such as the darkness of soul, disturbance in it, movement to low and earthly things, disquiet from various agitations and temptations, moving to lack of confidence, without hope, love, finding oneself totally slothful, tepid, sad, as if separated from one's created and Lord. Just as a consolation is contrary to desolation, in the same way the thoughts that come from the consolation are contrary to the thoughts that come from desolation. So a lot of words, but this is what desolation could feel like. It's the absence of God. I actually wanted to point out this. What's a very simple example of experiencing desolation is really it comes in, for me in my life, it's definitely slothfulness. If there's laziness, if I was doing well with my prayer, but now I'm just, I'm not really feeling the absence of God. Therefore, I'm really lacking motivation to pursue my own relationship with the Lord. And what's funny, when it says movement to low and earthly things, a good example of that is, I remember there was one time I committed to going to adoration in the evening, and I made the mental decision, no, I'm not going to do it. And in fact, I actually looked to my phone, and I grabbed my phone, and I was just on my phone for the rest of the night, and I didn't go. And that is sort of the absence, that's the movement to low and earthly things, that I don't want to go and spend time with our Lord. I want to spend time with what I have, and fall into that slothfulness, that tepidness, that sadness. And so it's very important that we understand that when your heart is discouraged, you have that little energy for spiritual things. And this is the key parts as we go through these first 4 rules to really understand where you're at. So again, rule 1 and 2, what is the fundamental direction of your life? But also rules 3 and 4, are you in spiritual consolation or are you in spiritual desolation? So it's a big balance of the two. Where are you at? Now, as we go through this to rules 5 through the rest of them, it's important to highlight these 4. There's an example of this. There is non-spiritual consolation and then spiritual consolation. What does that even mean? What does that even mean? Does someone have an example of what we can talk about it. What is an example of a spiritual consolation? It can be a very practical, it's pretty easy. And spiritual consolation where you feel the presence of God, yes. And so I think what's important to highlight is that you have this non-spiritual consolation. So for example, imagine if you're a nature lover, if you're a hiker, if you're all that. I would say this is for myself. I remember I went to a silent retreat, and I was asked to do a holy hour, 4 times throughout the day. And I actually took that as a chance to, okay, I'm going to go pray in different places, not just the chapel. I'm going to go out into the nature. I'm going to go out into here. And so I remember I found this very beautiful spot, and it was great. It was like a lovely garden that I was sitting at. And I remember that in this moment, I actually was loving where I was at. I was like, oh my God, this place is so beautiful. I feel so uplifted. Like, I love this. And in that moment, I was able to really continue into my prayer. And it was like, Lord, I really see your beauty in this moment. Lord, I love you. Lord, you allowed me to be here. Lord, I uplift myself to you. So the non-spiritual consolation is, okay, there are things in your life where if someone is complimenting you and thinking that you're a great person, maybe when you go into prayer, you're like, oh, like you have that better insight about yourself. But it's really important to understand the difference between what's non-spiritual consolation and spiritual consolation, how one could lead to the other. And it's really important to understand that we don't want to really rely on non-spiritual consolation, but be able to distinguish this is spiritual consolation. I'm receiving the upliftedness of God. In the same way, that's the same thing when it comes to desolation. If, for example, if I talk to Gio and Gio's like, you did this, and this, like you suck at this, like you're not good at this. In my own prayer, maybe if I go to prayer that day, I may experience a huge sense of desolation of, oh Lord, maybe I am this. Maybe I am not a truthful person, or maybe I am not as courageous as I may be. But do you see how that non-spiritual consolation really ties into the desolation ties into that spiritual desolation that you have. And so as we say this, this is what Father Timothy says. This is the most important rule out of all the 14 that he would say. Rule 5, the most important, and in fact, anytime you watch an interview or when he shares about this, he says, if there's anything that you don't receive from this talk, if there's anything you don't even get from this presentation today, Rule 5 will get you through most spiritual desolations in your life. And it's very simple. There's a huge bunch of words here, but what I have highlighted is never make a change. So in time of spiritual desolation, never make a change. So let's talk about that. And this is Sarah. She's my friend, another person. So let's bring this example of Sarah. So for example, say Sarah, she has been in a good consoling time, committed to prayer. And then there has been some times where she missed out on prayer. And so she decides to go to confession. And so let's just say she woke up, okay, there's 4 p.m. confession. I'm going to go for 4 p.m. confession. Now imagine when she hits 3 p.m., all of a sudden, she's like, okay, I'm not really feeling like going. I don't think I want to go. And confession isn't something that I don't know if I want to do, because maybe what she's experiencing is, you're just going to commit this sin again. What's the point of doing something like that? And so what Ignatius is trying to tell you in that rule, if I asked you right now, should she go to confession or not? Yes, right? Because what we see is that in this rule 5, to never make a change of any spiritual proposals that you have. Because what is the work of the enemy? And what this example is with the confession is that if the enemy, as he's working against you to tempt you, there could be something about that confession that breaks the power of desolation in that moment. So the enemy is going to do whatever it can to stop you from going. Is it slothfulness? If it's like you're not worthy enough. This is how many of us may experience something like this, where, okay, next week you're just going to find yourself in this confession again, and you're going to commit the same sin again. That is such a profound experience that we all experience in our own life. But this is the work of the enemy. And so what Rule 5 is saying, that the proposals and determinations that you made in the spiritual consolation, never make a change. Because spiritual desolation comes from slothfulness, from laziness, from not wanting to pray. But what this rule is trying to tell you is, no, stop right there. Go and do what you made the proposal to do. This is a very hard rule to follow, but this is why Father Timothy says, never make a change. This is the most important thing that we can do in our spiritual life. The moments when we don't feel like doing anything, sometimes in spiritual desolation, we tend to fall into the evil one's wisdom, which is, you're going to commit this sin again. You're not going to be able to, there's no point. You might as well just go the next week. But what we have to be aware of is the consolation should come from the good counsel of the Spirit, of the Holy Spirit. And so as we have this example, this is a very, to me, I share this example, but this is also a replication of my own life. Not wanting to pray or not wanting to go to confession because I don't want to make that change. And so, yep. And so this is just another one. Let's just say Ephraim becomes Father Ephraim in this sense. This is just what I was talking about in the first example of going to confession. Now, let's look at it more practically. So imagine Father Ephraim. Let's just say he's doing really well, and then all of a sudden, parish council meeting, and they want Father Ephraim to lead a 3-day retreat and to lead it. And so Father Ephraim, he's in a good consoling time, and he takes time to discern and pray with it, and says, and in his prayer, in his consolation, he agrees to do it. He wants to do it. He'll be like, okay, I will help and lead and go take part in this 3-day retreat. And so, as he's preparing for the retreat, he may find a lot of consolation. He may find himself being really very enriching his personal prayer, his time setting up the retreat, wanting to lead it in a lot of ways. And then 3 days before the retreat starts, let's say for example, something happens in a parish council meeting. Oh, let's have a gym. Oh, let's have another church. Why is there money going into this? I promise I'm not making any reference to anything. But let's just say in that parish council meeting, kind of similar to the example I said about Gio, where maybe that meeting didn't go that well, and people are actually doubting Father Ephraim's ability to lead. And he's telling him, why are you thinking in this way? Why are we making these decisions in this church? Why are we doing this? All this is actually affecting him, and 3 days before the retreat, the thought is coming to his head like, oh, God, people are thinking this of me. Should I lead this retreat? Should we still go forward with leading this retreat? I don't feel worthy enough anymore. People see this about me. And these are the kind of thoughts that come in. We can take that story and really apply it into our own lives. Oh, I'm not worthy enough to lead this retreat. And so, if we apply Rule 5, this is the last thing about that example is what Father Ephraim wants to do is he wants to postpone the retreat. And so that's the case study. So if we stopped right there, he wants to postpone the retreat. He thinks it's prudent. He thinks it's, that's something that, I should do. We should never, I don't want to go into it right now because of how bad the parish council meeting was. But if we apply Rule 5 to never make a change, should he go forward with the retreat? Yes. Yes. Because in this time of feeling discouraged or in this time where prayer feels difficult, what Rule 5 is trying to tell you is that, obviously, what is the working of the evil one? What is the evil one trying to do? Trying to stop this retreat from happening. And so much of that really happens in our own lives. And so in this rule, in this very specific example, the right way to apply this rule is that Father Ephraim should go forward with the retreat because the Lord is truly with him in this moment of desolation. There's something to ask in the sense of, when I was sharing about the wisdom, desolation provides you a lot of wisdom, like, oh, you shouldn't go do this because of this, this, and this. And there's these things that we try to say in our own heads. But as we say, in time of desolation, never make a change. When you're in spiritual desolation, you should never change anything in the spiritual life. So the last thing I'll say about that example is that when that happens to us, there's 2 questions that we need to ask ourselves. One is, are we in spiritual desolation? Do we feel the absence of God? If yes, that's where Rule 5 comes apart. And so with Father Ephraim, he's going to ask himself, am I in spiritual desolation? Yes, I am. I don't feel the closeness of God. And so therefore, then you ask the second question, should I enter into, and should I make the spiritual proposal? Should I change it up? And in this case, it's no, never make a change. The evil one is trying to work against you in this situation. So never make a change in whatever spiritual proposals you had before in the consolation. Now, I'm about to say the opposite, and this is Rule 6. So when we talk about Rule 6, Rule 6 might sound a little bit, what the heck, what are you talking about? Well, let's read it. Although in desolation, we should not change our first proposals, so wanting to pray, going out for confession, or going to Mass every day, it's very advantageous to change ourselves intensely against the desolation itself, as by insisting more on prayer, on meditation, upon examination, and extending ourselves in a suitable way for penance. So this is, no matter what, how we say, never make a change, but do not be passive in the desolation. Desolation is really a hard place to be in because you feel the absence of God, and also there's a lack of motivation in wanting to do anything. But these are the 4 steps that he provides. That's actually, even though in Rule 5 it says never make a change to the spiritual proposals, the goodness of your heart, to pray, to go for confession, Rule 6 is saying do not be passive in that. Don't just allow that to go away in that sense. And so that's actually a purifying time in desolation when it's the most hardest to pray, where St. Ignatius tells you, pray. And it's actually very beautiful. In the 4 steps that he provides, there's actually an example that is said, in desolation, it feels like, if you say, for example, you committed to 30 minutes of prayer, in your desolation, you're probably sitting in adoration and you're like, I'm not getting anything out of this. I'm not feeling the presence of God. I don't want to do this. What's actually a very beautiful practical rule is that sometimes when we're in desolation, our prayer may get cut short and we want to make it just 20 minutes and not really want to stay and pray anymore. But this is actually what St. Ignatius says, you shouldn't pray for 20 minutes. You shouldn't pray for 30 minutes. You should pray for 35 minutes. Pray a few minutes more. Because what you're doing is you're understanding, you know there's interior movements in your hearts, you are aware that you are in spiritual desolation, and the best way to counteract this desolation is to go against whatever movement it wants you to do. So if the bad spirit wants you to shorten your prayer, you do the opposite. You don't even stick to the 30 minutes, you stick to 35 minutes. You go a little bit more, you extend prayer a little more. This is a very, very hard thing to do sometimes, especially minutes. When it comes to prayer may feel like forever. But again, I urge you, when you fall into this temptation, when you want to shorten prayer, that is the evil one trying to work at you, trying to stop you from prayer, because maybe there could be something in that last 5 minutes where you experience some sense of consolation in the desolation. And so another thing that he says in Rule 6 is that it's actually very important to journal. And this is something I'm not really good at. I used to always type all my notes and everything, but journaling is actually a very beautiful part, because you ask for prayer and meditation, but I'm talking about this meditation. Think of scriptural verses, memories of God's fidelity towards you. The reason why we want to journal, a big reason of it, is when you're in moments of desolation, it's very recommended that you write it out. The Lord has really loved me in this moment because of this, this, and this. And this is actually something that you can go back to, because when you're in desolation, you forget the Lord's love. It's so easy to forget that. You feel the absence of God. But if you have this is your own living proof that, oh, the Lord has loved me. He has shown his fidelity towards me. And then the last one is with examination and suitable penance. What Rule 6 is trying to do is, it's always, a good spiritual director will always ask you, what are you feeling? How are you feeling? How did this start? The reason for that is just to help you enter into that awareness and put vocabulary to what is you're feeling. That way you're able to, it's hard to tackle something you don't know what it's called, or whatever feel, you don't, when people say, I don't know what I feel, I don't know what I feel. The reason we want to name that is so that once we know what the name of that feeling is, if it's desolation, if you feel loneliness, that way you can really tackle it, go against whatever the evil spirit has for you. I'm going to go through rules 7 through 9 back to back to back, and then I'll come back. As we do rules 5 through 9, they actually show the actions of what you should be doing in desolation. So I'm going to go through rule 7. When you are in spiritual desolation, remember this truth, that God is giving you sufficient grace that you need to safely go through this desolation. That no matter what, if you don't feel the grace of God, if you don't feel the presence of God, it's so easy to forget this. And the evil one is going to try to make you believe this lie that the Lord is not present in your life, and that you are actually receiving sufficient grace to receive him. Rule 8 is, when you are in spiritual desolation, be patient, stay the course, and remember that consolation will come back. Whenever we feel like we are in desolation, at least in my own life, I don't really, I forget I lose hope in the sense of, consolation, will come. I actually forget that. And it's actually really important to not forget that, because you're in a sense of hopelessness. And the evil one is trying to crowd your mind, make you stay inside your head, and not wanting to realize that there is hope. Because without that hope is the lack of motivation to go against and work against the desolation. Now, rule 9 is actually a very beautiful rule, and it's when we are in desolation. The most common question is, why am I in this desolation? I hate this, Lord. Why did you put this in my life? And this rule 9 helps you explain and understand what the reason could be. And so why does God, who loves us, allow us to experience spiritual desolation? There's three things. He helps us to see and make changes in our own life, to strengthen us in our resistance in the desolation, and to help us not be complacent in the spiritual life. Complacent is a very important word here. Complacency means like you are satisfied in the box that you're in. In the desolation that you're in, you are satisfied. The way that we feel when we come into desolation, it's very important to be aware about what it is you're feeling, what it is that you are going through. Because in this, that way you can understand that, okay, I need to make these changes in my life. I need to come to that awareness, oh, I am in desolation. I need to get out of this place. A time of desolation is a very fearful time. It's very scary. It feels like a lack of God, and that can be a very scary, non-consoling feeling. I had this uncle who was sharing, and that prayer that we were saying today, this uncle that I know, he was talking about, with this rule specifically, there was a time where he was deep in desolation, so deep in desolation, and there was a prayer that he earnestly said with his whole heart, Lord, take away my understanding, take away my knowledge in any of this. Lord, take away my strength. Lord, take away my name, my identity, take everything away from me. Because he wanted to empty himself so that he can fully rely on the Lord more. And when he was sharing this story, he was getting emotional. He was sharing, that was the most earnest, honest prayer he was sharing in his life. Lord, take away all these things. Because what Rules 5 through 9 is trying to help you is in desolation, that is a time that we can purify ourselves and rely more on the Lord. Knowing that we are right here at rock bottom, but yet in this rock bottom, I'm not going to turn to the evil and desolate spirits in my life. But Lord, in all that I am, I don't feel you, I don't experience the love of you, but no matter what, I still latch onto you, I rely on you, Lord, I still desire you. And these are the things that, these are kind of like the common points that we say when we're in the desolation. A very tough time where prayer feels dry. Maybe I shouldn't go for Mass, or prayer is, I'm too much of a sinner. There's no point in going for prayer. This is actually a journal entry. As I'm talking about this consolation and desolation, sometimes the question arises where, oh, what about this like middle area? Sometimes I may not feel like I'm feeling the consoling love of the Lord, but also I don't think I'm like as in a desolate period where I feel the absence of the Lord. This is actually one of my journal entries. I'm going to be very vulnerable in sharing. But I remember I was talking to my spiritual director, and I had no idea how to say what I wanted to say. And so I drew it out, and I said, on the left is really good. Life is great. I'm doing great. I'm consoling. And then on the right side, it's really bad. What this ugly line graph is trying to show is, for me, in consolation, it's really easy for me to pray and be uplifted by the Lord. When it's really bad, that's when I enter into a state of like, okay, I'm in desolation. Like, I really, really need to pray and to get out of this. But there's that like weird gray area. And it's not, to me, it didn't really feel like desolation. And so there is that tranquil sense where there is a middle area. And so these are the things to just keep notice of in this time. These rules are talking about the consoling and desolate periods of our life. But sometimes you can be in consolation for 6 months and then desolation for 3 months. But sometimes you can actually be consoling in the morning and desolate in the evening. And there's a huge fluctuation throughout the day. If I'm waking up and Mass was so beautiful, something about the homily really touched me, and then if I go and then experience some hardship at work, I may feel like in a non-spiritual desolation, and I go into prayer and I don't feel so strong. There's so much roller coaster and fluctuation that happens in the everyday life. So it may not just be attached to different set length of time, but it's important to know that there is a fluctuation, there is a roller coaster, and to not be afraid of that. Desolation is never a time to be afraid of, and what these rules will do will help you in. The book is called Ignatian Guide for Everyday Living. So you are provided toolbox to understand and know the wisdom of God in each moment of your life. And so that is kind of the goal of these rules. And this is just one more fundamental truth that to show and throw at you guys is that God will never, He doesn't cause or throw desolation at you, but He does permit it to happen because of what Rule 7 is saying. Because it helps us create awareness of the changes that we have to make, strengthen the weaknesses of our heart, and then lastly, to help us not be complacent. So if you think about in your own life when you have been complacent, these are the three things that God allows us to go through, this self-awareness, this understanding, so that the next time you go to desolation, I was talking about this with a friend, after really practicing these rules in my life, When I feel like I'm in desolation, it felt like huge rock bottom. But the next time I entered into spiritual desolation, that rock bottom actually elevated a little bit, 10, 15% more. Where I know where I'm at, I'm aware of what's happening in my life, but the Lord is still there. And there's been moments when it's just been completely absolute rock bottom. And that is kind of what the beauty of what Rule 9 is telling you, to strengthen this. He doesn't throw it at you, but he permits the desolation to happen to you for our own betterment. So, as a recap, as you look through Rules 5 through 9, they're actually how to take action in the spiritual desolation that you're in. So, we're saying all these things about desolation. Some of you are, all of you are probably like, oh man, I'm in desolation, there's no hope, and all these things. But on the other side of that, there's Rule 10, which talks about consolation. In Rule 10, let the one who is in consolation think how he will conduct himself in the desolation which will come soon after, taking strength in that time. So, consolation will happen in your life. It will happen. If you feel like you're desolate and you're not feeling that, that is a lie. But consolation will happen. I remember about 3 months ago, I was talking with my spiritual director, and I was really in a sense of spiritual consolation. I had so much motivation to pray, and it was actually over a length of months. And I told my spiritual director, I totally forgot. I don't know how to do, oh my gosh, I'm so scared. I don't want to lose this feeling. I love this feeling so much. And I was so afraid of, oh my gosh, I'm scared. This height of my roller coaster is going to go down one day. And what's important to know in Rule 10, if you are in a state of consolation, is that it's actually a time of the Lord is allowing, he's showing his love for you in such a beautiful personal way. And those are the moments that you should take strength in. Those are the moments when you should be journaling and really understanding the voice of the Lord, the fidelity of Christ in your life. And as you take that whole rock bottom will actually be to the 15th percent or the 20th percent when you experience desolation again. And so Rule 11 is in a similar way, let one who is consoled seek to humble himself and lower himself as much as he can, thinking of how little he is capable in the time of desolation without such grace or consolation. But on the contrary, let one who is in spiritual desolation think he can do much with God's sufficient grace to resist all the workings of the evil one. I have this very beautiful selfie. So this is quite the story we'll share. But basically, an example of this, what Rule 11 is, very important to really understand. There was a time where I was really all about praying the rosary. I was so inflamed, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love the rosary. I love doing this. I really want to do this. And I remember one point in my life, I watched a YouTube video. And the YouTube video, there was a video that talked about there's a very beautiful grace when you pray all the mysteries of the rosary, the glorious, the sorrowful, the joyful. I remember it in that time. I was really pumped. I was in consolation. I was like, I can do this. I can pray I prayed all 4 mysteries of the rosary. And I did that every day. And I did that for about a couple months. And there was I was seeing grace in that. I was like, oh my God, the Lord is allowing me to do this. This is it. I'm in consolation. Until I realized that what happened, and I'm sharing this very vulnerably, as I was praying the 4 rosaries throughout the day, there was grace that I was noticing at the beginning of my life. Resisting temptation was a lot easier. I felt the love of the Lord more. But then I started to, I was being a little bit too confident, and I was allowing, okay, I'm in consolation. I can add this to my life. I can add this to my life. I'm gonna go study this. I'm gonna go read this spiritual book and do all these things that are very enriching. But there could be a danger in that, of allowing and adding so much to your plate. So for example, with this rosary thing, I remember in the middle of it, I started to not really be reflective of the mystery itself when I'm praying the 10 decades. So I would actually, as I was praying the 4, I would pray a lot in my car and while I'm driving. But I remember it started to now become a checklist. Okay, I finished the first one, and you go do the second and the third. And you go do the 4th one, and you get up and go do it. And it was okay, if I did all 4, I'm going to get all the graces of the day. So that was my motivation. But I started to get burnt out in a little bit. And then that actually hurt my own relationship with the rosary, because I was doing it not in a prudent way. And I was This is actually a picture of me going to my spiritual director, telling him, I've been praying these beautiful 4 rosaries for the last couple months, but I don't think I actually been honestly and earnestly praying it. And at that moment, it was very beautiful. It was very consoling and a healing time. Because as I was there, my spiritual director just said, okay, so, and he highlighted this rule 11. He basically said, you got a little too greedy, you got a little too, you heightened yourself a little bit. And because of that, I didn't humble myself in this consolation. So what actually happened after that spiritual direction was I went back to praying 1 rosary a day. And in that sense, I realized how much I realized I needed to re-experience the beauty of each of the mysteries and being reflective. Because before I'm just, okay, I need to go through this all 4, I need to go through this, I need to go through this, I need to go through this. But then after I switched to the 1, after I humbled myself in understanding the life that I'm in and the time commitment that I have, I went back to 1 and in a sense re-experienced the love of praying the rosary again. As of now, I'm going to be honest, I'm only praying 1, not going back to 4 yet. There is tremendous grace, don't get me wrong, but if you are properly going about that in a prudent way. So that in a sense is an example of what Rule 11 can be like in the consolation time. But again, in the desolation, understand that you can do so much in that time. Because you have 2 trains of thought in consolation and in desolation. Consolation, you feel like you're on high, on mighty, on top of the world. And then in desolation, you feel like you're rock bottom. But what Rule 11 is saying is to humble yourself in the consolation, but understand if you are in desolation, if you're struggling to pray, you can do so much. There is grace, and the Lord is going to reach out to you. So Rule 12, so we're going to get to 12, 13, and 14. Now, Father Timothy says Rule 5 is one of the most important. This is actually, the next couple rules actually also really, really help you into taking action. So Rule 12 is talking about standing firm in the beginning of temptation. So I have this is kind of like a small thing, but let's say Ephraim and Sarah, and they have a committed prayer life. They're going for this, and the evil spirit is like, why don't you pray later? Why don't you go at another time? Don't do that. And then what this rule is trying to tell you that there's like a snowball effect when it comes to temptation, and it's what this rule is highlighting is that you want to cut it off at the very beginning, at the very initial parts of the temptation. When the question comes up, don't you want to pray later? No, I pray at this time. I always committed at this time. I'm going to go for prayer. Don't you want to go to like a later mass, and then then later in the day you don't go to mass at all? No, I plan to go for this mass, and I'm going to go. That story I shared about Sarah going to the confession at 4 p.m. At the initial parts of the temptation, that's actually where temptation is at its weakest. The introduction of the idea, the thought of, well, maybe I don't need to go for this. That's where you stop and you cut it off and say, no, I'm going to act against the desolation, and I'm going to go and commit to what I committed to. For example, anytime back in 2021. I was very good at going to Kurbana at 7 p.m., English Kurbana at 7 p.m., but at 6:30 p.m., for some reason, that's when the thought comes to my head, because it takes 20 minutes to get to church, but at 6:30, do you actually really want to go? After I prepared my whole day to help me and get going and get into my car, but every single day, almost at 6:30, right before I'm about to get up, I'm literally in my bed, just chilling, and then I definitely noticed the evil spirit is like, you're pretty comfortable where you're at. I think you should stay and you should chill. How much of that happens in our own life? And what Rule 12 is trying to tell you in the very beginning, you can notice this, resist the enemy's temptation right at the very beginning. It's very important because as you're going through all these rules, you'll have that awareness of, okay, I know what's interiorly moving on in my heart. I know what the thoughts are happening in my own life. I know I committed to prayer, but what if I don't? That's where it's a good point of practicing and taking action and rejecting that and going for what you committed to. Rule 13 is a very long one, but I'm actually going to read out this whole thing, and it feels like a lot. But likewise, he's conduct himself as a false lover and wishing to remain secret and not be revealed. For a dissolute man who, speaking with evil intention, makes dishonorable advances to a daughter of a good father or a wife of a good husband, wishes his words and persuasions to be secret, and the contrary displeases him very much. When the daughter reveals to her father or the wife to let her husband, his false words and depraved intention. Because he is easily perceived that he will not be able to succeed with the undertaking that's begun, in the same way, when the enemy of human nature brings his wiles and persuasions to the just soul, he wishes and desires that they be received and kept in secret. But when one reveals to them, to one good confessor, or to another spiritual person, or someone who's in deceit, malicious designs, it weighs on him very much, because he perceives that he will not be able to succeed with the maliciousness undertaking he has begun, since his manifest deceits have been revealed. That's a huge paragraph. In a sense, what it's trying to say is how much of the desolation is trying to actually keep you secret. Sometimes in desolation, it's easy to not share that, or not share that you're struggling. This is an example of a false lover who wants to have the benefits of the romantic relationship, but doesn't want anybody to know the false doings that he is partaking in. Because once it comes out to the light, then all the maliciousness becomes undone. And you can think about that in your own life. In spiritual desolation, there's a tendency of where we don't want to share, we don't want to go and seek out, but when we don't take that action at all, and it's actually very important to realize, okay, no, I should share to someone. When I entered into spiritual direction, it was actually, I entered in at spiritual desolation of my life. There came a moment where I had to be honest about what I was feeling, and I needed to go and share what I had and bring out to the light. And in that actually helped me be aware of the desolation that's acting in my life, and bringing it out into the light brings out a sense of I forgot what it says. This is where the undertaking begins. And so when you bring it out into the light, the evil one is really, under the light, can't really work hard to go against you. Okay, like if you go up to your spiritual director, I remember I was telling my spiritual director, I'm not able to pray, I'm not able to find consistency in that. And once I brought it out, once I said it, that's like 50% of the work. And immediately after, my life started to turn around. Once you bring it out into the light, once you share what you're going through, then out into the light, that's when the good spirit really comes and helps and counsels you. So who can we seek out? And these are just practical examples. For me, in my context, it was a spiritual director, or if you have a competent spiritual friend, if you're going through something, if you're going through a certain sin, if you're going through a huge desolation, if you're not able to pray, it's actually really good to just share to a friend that can really understand you, a spiritually competent friend that can uplift you and affirm the good spirit in your life and push away and reject the bad spirit in your life. Confession. One thing about confession is sometimes we only confess the sins itself, but we never really confess the root of sin. Because in our own pride, we never confess this self-righteousness that we feel. I'm not feeling good enough to go pray. I feel like I'm going to commit this sin again. There's no point in doing this. But I promise, if you go into confession, I promise this will be a huge breakthrough in your confession when you bring out into the light what is the root of that? What is the self-righteousness that we feel when it comes to these sins? I promise there's huge breakthrough in the sacrament of reconciliation when you bring it out into the light. And then there's a book here that I have. So there's two books that he's written, and this one is The Discernment of Spirits in Marriage. It's actually I got a couple married people that would want to read this. I got you. This is actually, I recommend, if you really want to start off, it actually helps you. It follows the story of two couples, and it's an example, and it goes through all 14 rules in a really digestible, easy way, and shows how when we talk about bringing out into the light, sometimes in marriage, in our own spousal relationships, it's very hard. It's very hard to tell your spouse, I'm going through this. Because what we're hoping for is that when we share, I'm in spiritual desolation, I'm going through this, what we're hoping the other spouse does is, okay, let me pray for you in that. Let's walk with this together. And so it's actually very important in your relationship, in your spousal relationship, in your own vocation, there are people, especially your spouses, to reach out to, because that also strengthens the marriage in itself too, once you bring it out into the light. So again, Rule 13, when you find burdens in your heart, in your spiritual life, and the temptations, confusion, discouragement, find a wise, competent spiritual person and talk about it. Once it comes out into the light, all the work of the evil one will be done. So we're going to go into our last one. And Rule 14 Likewise, he conducts himself as a leader. It's like a little bit of an imaginative story. He conducts himself as a leader intent upon conquering and robbing what he desires. For just as a captain and the leader of an army in the field, pitching his camp and exploring the fortifications and defenses of the stronghold, attacks at its weakest point. In the same way, the enemy of the human nature, roving about, looks and turns all our theological, cardinal, and moral virtues, and where he finds us in the weakest and most need for our eternal salvation, there he attacks us, and there he attempts to take us. So think about this, if you are a Lord of the Ring fan. There's like a sense of like a stronghold that we have, and let's say that stronghold is your spiritual life. You know, maybe the best way to attack this stronghold isn't to go at the front gate, right? Maybe the best way to do is, there might be somewhere in the west wing, there's broken walls or something. And so they're going to come in through that way and attack. Do we see that in our own spiritual life? What are the ways that the evil one sees the weaknesses of your life? So I know, in a sense of the best defense to go against this, and I just want to iterate, as weaknesses come, think about a certain sin that you may struggle with. One of the most important things to do is to identify the trigger, or what is causing that. What is at the root cause of what you're feeling? There is no shame in desolation. And sometimes when we feel desolation, we're like, I feel like, I don't have a consistent prayer life. I'm not doing well. And then we start to speak at ourselves, and you have to ask yourself, who is speaking in that? Who's saying you're not competent enough? You're not worthy to receive? That's the working of the evil one, trying to push you away from the direction of the Lord. And so, the best defense is to, one, be aware of the weaknesses in our life. I know someone that struggles with alcoholism a lot, and one of the things that they shared is that sometimes when they're alone at the house, when they feel lonely, that's when they feel the tendency to drink. And so much of that is actually so strong in our own lives when we feel alone, or if we fall into a sense of pride. You want to identify these patterns of what are the things that you're struggling with, because when you do that, you actually identify the wall that's been broken, and then you focus on patching it up. So what Rule 14 is saying, identify your weaknesses and strengthen it. And that in a time of consolation, when you're receiving new strength, those are the walls that you want to work on. Okay, if I know I commit a specific sin when I feel lonely, what are ways that you can fortify that? What are the ways that we can stop the trigger from even happening in the first place? For example, if like that story I shared when I was choosing to not go to adoration or just pick up my phone and draw towards low and earthly things. Imagine if I didn't put, and what that story showed, if I didn't apply this rule, knowing that, okay, I have a weakness towards, okay, I feel slothful if I feel lazy. Imagine what my prayer life could have, what ended up happening to it 6-7 months along the lines. But if I just actually took this rule in that moment, if I realized, okay, the enemy wants me to grab my phone and be distracted, how much my life could have changed if I went a different way? And 2 weeks from now, 6 months from now, if I took these rules and applied it. So it's important this is what St. Ignatius says, to know thyself, know yourself. Because that's what these 14 rules are trying to do. Help you understand the weaknesses of your own heart. So identify the area that you, in your life that you feel that is most vulnerable in the enemy's temptation and discouraging lies, and strengthen it. So in the spiritual journey, identify the weaknesses and strengthen it. And as we're coming to a close, just to reiterate these 3 steps, 1, to be aware, to understand and take action. What this is all doing, these 14 rules, when you look at it, is to help you understand the enemy's playbook. It's to understand how he comes out and against you. I have a seminarian friend who says he reads this book. I can't believe he said that, but he said he reads his book every month. He reads this entire book every single month to remind him of the rules. That's why when you have this piece of paper in your hand, it's actually, I know people that actually, and even myself, I'm going to start doing it after today. Some people actually keep this paper and they put it to where they work at, where they do work at, and they keep it there so they are always aware of these 14 rules in their life. It's easy I can share these 14 rules with you, but it's easy to forget these things because obviously the evil one wants you to forget this certain tools in the toolbox that you have to go against the desolation. So again, as a recap, when you look at the 14 rules as a whole, I hope that what you're sharing these writings came from the late 14th, 15th century, but you can actually be like, oh my gosh, like when I read this, I was like, oh, I actually fell into that. I remember, like, I actually relate to this rule because this actually has happened in my own life. So, as a recap, rules 1 to 2, talking about the fundamental direction towards God. So that's where you start. You ask yourself right now, what direction am I heading towards? Am I moving towards God or am I not? And then 3 and 4 discusses what spiritual consolation and desolation really is, to be aware of that, and also what we talked about, non-spiritual consolation and non-spiritual desolation. Rules 5 through 9 talks about the actions you should take when you're in desolation. So whenever you feel like you're in desolation, always go back to these rules. Always go back to these rules. And what you can see with this is St. Ignatius he's not adding something new to the spiritual life. He's actually just helping put vocabulary to what it is you're feeling. And once you have that vocabulary, you have a better awareness of what you're going through. So again, rules 5 through 9, always go back to the rules, and it will help you put vocabulary to what you're feeling. 10 and 11 really focuses on what you should be doing in consolation, to remember to stay humble in that. 12, resist the initial temptations. 13 is the courage to speak to a spiritual person. And then the last one is to fortify weaknesses. I have 3 more slides left, but I chose this one because sometimes our spiritual life, when I was talking about, it just feels like it's a big up and down, up and down, up and down. And you just feel like there's no progression. But if you actually zoom out, there is a general trend. That experience where I shared like that 0% going to a 15% the next time I enter desolation, that's actually very real in your life. And it's really important to know, sometimes we're so focused on this big downfall right there. But if we take notice of the Lord's working in our lives, and that's what these rules are designed to do. The last thing I wanted to leave off with is that there was an interview with Father Timothy, and someone came up to him and told him, I'm no longer like reacting to the bad things in my life. I'm actually responding to it. So much of spiritual desolation can come because we're not responding. We're not taking action. We can prep you so much and tell you to be aware and understand. The rules really help you understand with the first 2. But with the grace of God, with prayers for petition with the Lord, Lord, I need you in this. I need to rely on you more. Then you will have the strength to take action, to accept the consolation or to reject the desolation. So that is it. That's my bibliography. But again, a lot of this, I started off, I really recommend, this is the book to really read. This one talks about each rule and goes into it with so much more examples and helps you systematically understand what you're going through. It provides way more examples. And then this one is actually a really good way to digest it. Even if you start off with this one, it's actually a little bit more simple. It's a little shorter too, and it helps you in a practical way, especially in the spirit of marriage. The 14 rules taking place. So a lot of this came from these 2 things. This is a QR code. This will take you to a Google Drive. It has these slides and it has the 2 pieces of paper that you have. So if y'all need it. Okay, yeah, we'll also link it as well. But yeah, this will take you to a Google Drive folder, and all these slides are yours if you ever want to come back to. Again, I urge you, these are rules that, again, it doesn't invent something new, but will help you in your spiritual life. It's easy to forget them, but if we actually live this way, St. Paul says, the love of my heart is for the Lord. And if we actually practice these 14 rules in our lives, how much will we actually mean that? That I love the Lord with all my heart. With that, as you can see with this prayer, again, it's a very beautiful prayer, and if we can actually all close with this. Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and my entire will. All I have and call my own. You have given all to me. To you, Lord, I return it. Everything is yours. Do with it what you will. Give me only your love and your grace. That is enough for me. I ask George Justin to end us with a blessing.
I want to say 2 things.
Oh, yes.
First off, thank you, Joel, for this wonderful talk on 14 ways of Ignatian spirituality. And I want to share 2 things. I want to echo what Father Timothy Gallagher and what Joel has said. If there's anything you could remember from this talk, remember rule number 5. And I say this because in my first year of theology at Mundelein Seminary, University of St. Mary of the Lake near Chicago, in my first year of theology, for our retreat, we had Father Timothy Gallagher, and he shared basically the entire week of retreat. Silent Retreat was on 14 Rules of Discernment, his book. And he always drilled into each one of us rule number 5. And in fact, there's some t-shirts made of it. So look up Amazon, and I recommend buying that shirt. So never ignore rule number 5. At least remember that rule, I mean. And the second thing is the rector of my seminary that time has emphasized to us again and again, he would tell us, pay more attention to your temptations than your sin. Now you would wonder, isn't sin greater? Yes, it is greater, but every sin has a story of one thing leading to another, ultimately causing you to commit that particular sin. So as Joel has emphasized, it's good to know yourself, to know your weaknesses, to know your strength, invite the Lord into your area of weakness so that he could bring healing into that area, to really give you the tools to really combat that and to really help overcome it. And of course, it will take time. So those are the 2 things I would like to share. So thank you so much again, Joel, for this wonderful, it was for me a refresher from that retreat of Father Timothy Gallagher. And with that, I shall give you my blessing. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with all of you, now, always, and forever. Amen.